Our lesson this morning, I'm not even going to pronounce the name of it yet because I've heard different people pronounce this particular word differently over the past, for a long time. And so, as we start to discuss this new enemy of Israel, I wanted to find out what it was, how it is that this name is actually pronounced, because, like I said, I've heard it pronounced different ways. So, of course, I went to my good friend Google for advice, just find out how it is that this word is pronounced. Now, I didn't want phonetic spelling with little squiggles and upside down E's and stuff like that. I wanted to hear people actually say it. And so I found several different sites that had the name actually spoken. You just click a button and it would speak it for me. So I went through, and of all the U.S.-based sites, the majority of them pronounced it Philistine. Well, that's how I pronounce it anyway, so that's awesome. There was only one I found that pronounced it Philistine. Of course, all the ones in all the British sites said Philistine. That's okay, they can do that over there, but I think here today I'm just going to say Philistine like I always do. So I don't like to be incorrect, and if I am incorrect, I want to make things right. And so the Philistines are the people we're going to be studying today, and the spirit that they represent in the world today. The Philistines are referenced almost 300 times in the Bible. Some of the most recognizable of this enemy were Goliath, the Philistines' champion, the unnamed wife of Samson, and Dagon and Beelzebub, which were Philistine gods. Also, I ran across Ashtoreth was another of the Philistine gods. Though not descendants of Canaan, as the enemies previously studied, the Philistines were still of the lineage of Ham, but through Mizraim, another of his sons. And of course, if we recall, Mizraim is another name for Egypt. It's the word itself means tribulation, and the Egyptians were descended from Mizraim. Also unmentioned in this lesson is the fact that the word Philistine is the origin of our modern word for the people in the area where they live now, Palestinians and Palestine. It's not something that I've found a lot of information on up until this point, but in studying that I did come across this and I found it very interesting. The golden truth this morning, Exodus 23 and 31, "And I will set thy bounds from the Red Sea even unto the sea of the Philistines, and from the desert unto the river. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and thou shalt drive them out before thee." Now, part 1, the Philistines. Exodus 23, 32 and 33. "Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in thy land, lest they make thee sin against me. For if thou serve their gods, it will surely be a snare unto thee." The Philistines are mentioned in the Bible as early as Abraham's day. As I was studying through this, I found that several commentators find it questionable as to whether these are the actual same group of people, whether they're just different people with similar name, who actually in the future would pose a great threat to Israel after the days of Abraham. Once again, I couldn't find, this happened one of the other lessons, I couldn't find any evidence to support the author's definition of Philistine. But what I found is that the word means immigrants. This indicates that they were not natives of Canaan, but likely originated in other parts of the Mediterranean and only came into the biblical areas that they are associated with later. Once Jacob's descendants finally escaped Egypt, the Lord directed their path away from the territory of the warring Philistines. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, "Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and return to Egypt." It's Exodus 13:17. In the years that followed, the Philistines came to be considered the archenemy of the nation of Israel, engaging in multiple battles with them. The outcomes of the encounters depended upon the Israelite nation's relationship with God. And we see this throughout the Word of God, not only with the Philistines, but with all the enemies of the Israelites, and for that matter, the Israelites generally. That is to say that when the Israelites were faithful to God, He was with them, and they were able to overcome the trials that came against them. But when they failed to serve God as they should, God would allow these enemies to begin to prevail. This was not so much a form of punishment as it was discipline in order to lead His straying people back to Himself. Now most people wouldn't think of discipline and punishment as being different, but they're very different. They have very different definitions, and the differences go beyond even the definitions into the reasoning behind the activity. To punish is to inflict suffering for a past behavior. To discipline is to teach in order to modify future behavior. Now, it still kind of sounds similar, but whenever God allows difficulties in our lives, you can be sure that it's for our benefit. It's for us to learn. It's for us to grow. It's in order to lead us in a better direction. Whenever God allows, God does not punish so that we will fear Him. That may be the way some people behave. They may punish in hopes of inflicting fear on the individual so they'll be afraid of them. Now, in my own personal life, I've recognized the futility of punishment when it comes to small animals like cats. Punishment does not work, because what happens is if I have a cat and that cat is scratching on my sofa and I spray that cat with water, what happens is the cat knows not to scratch on the furniture while I'm around. That doesn't fix the behavior of the cat. All that does is train me to spray the cat with water. Cat's not changed. The cat's going to scratch the furniture while I'm not looking. If it's any other animal, if it's just something that the cat knows to avoid, okay, well, if that thing over there has that and he's holding it like that, I'm going to get wet if I do this, so I'm not going to do this. Well, it's no different with our own behavior. Well, there's a cop that sits over here every single day, so when I go by this area, I'm going to slow down. Well, that's not changing our behavior. It's just affecting us when we know that trouble is going to come our way. That we can't do that with God. Fact of the matter is, I'm not always around my cat. Fact of the matter is, there's not always a cop hiding around the next sign. But God knows. We can't hide and do things around behind God's back. When He allows us to experience the discipline, it's in order to benefit us. It's to help us to recognize that the trials we often face are of our own making. When we struggle, sometimes He allows these things into our lives to show this is what happens. If you tell your child, don't touch that stove, it's hot. And this child reaches up and touches the stove, that child's going to say, oh my goodness, I understand what hot is now. I'm not going to do that again. My parents weren't trying to be mean to me. They were trying to protect me. And that's the way God wants us to respond to His discipline. He wants us to recognize, oh my goodness, when I make this choice, it's really bad the way it works out. I'm not going to make that choice again. I'm not going to choose to do this thing that God specifically told me not to do, because when He told me not to do it and I did it, I experienced some difficulty that I wasn't expecting. I had a trial that I had to face as a result of my actions. It wasn't something that God did to me because He was mad at me. It was something that God allowed to happen in order for me to learn to avoid those things in the future. Oftentimes, when we look back to some of the trials that we faced in our own lives, when we look back on them honestly, we can clearly see the guiding hand of a loving God, a loving Father, trying to lead us back to Him and His desire to see the best for His children. Punishment leaves an individual with a sense of dread and a desire to avoid the one who applied the punishment in the first place. Discipline shows us where we have gone wrong and helps us to understand how to avoid future difficulties. It instills in us a respect for the one who has applied the discipline, because we understand that this individual has our best interest at heart. It's not something that they're doing out of their own malice. It's not something that they're doing because they're having troubles of their own and they're just acting out on us. We understand that they're giving us this instruction, they're giving us this guidance, they're allowing these things to come upon us because they love us, because they're concerned about our well-being, and they want to see the best for us. When we realize that the choices we've made have brought the difficulties on us, we understand the need to alter our own behavior. This is the benefit of discipline. And when applied correctly, we see the wisdom of God to lead us in the right direction. Especially by the time of Samson, the Philistines were a dominant force in the Mediterranean coastal area. They had 5 main cities: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. By intermarrying, the Philistines integrated their culture and gods with that of the other groups they mingled with. Archaeology has revealed evidence that the Philistines began incorporating some Hebrew words into their own language. This brings to mind the attempt of many people today to sound Christian while still retaining their own culture of ungodliness. Now, just stepping off to the side here for a second, they want to have a form of godliness, they want to look godly, but they're denying the power to actually change our lives. There are so many today who will attend church, but they don't allow God to modify their behavior by His faithful discipline. They continue to do those things, and then they continue to wonder why it is that they continue to face troubles. They don't know why they're dealing with trials. They say, well, I've not done anything wrong, I'm going to church. Well, it's not just about going to church. It's about allowing God to lead us and guide us away from the things that hinder us and toward the things that will benefit us. We've heard a lot about the opposite of this particular thing in our district convention yesterday. We talked about how we need to have that true godliness. We need to have it on the inside. And if we have it on the inside, it will show on the outside. Godly living is not found in the words we speak or the clothes we wear. It's easy to change and adjust these depending on our surroundings. Now, Jesus said, there's no such thing as changing our hearts by changing the words we speak. We can't change our hearts by changing the words we speak or the clothes we wear. Jesus said in Luke 6:45, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. We may be able to hide our hearts from one another temporarily. We may be able to appear to be servants of God for a while. But eventually, the true nature of our hearts is going to show through. And besides all this, God already knows what's deep inside of us at any given moment in time. Galatians 6:7-8 tells us, be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth of the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. But when we allow God to have full reign in our hearts, that will also show on the outside. This verse, when I read these particular verses, I think of a farmer planting seed. That farmer may plant anything. I'm just going to say right now he's planting corn. And none of us would ever imagine that a farmer planting corn would drop that seed in the ground and cover it over and expect apple trees to come up. That's ridiculous. That doesn't even make sense. Yet, when we say that we're serving the Lord, but in our hearts, we're still serving self. We're still allowing the things of this world to lead us and guide us. We're doing the same thing. We're putting one thing down and expecting something else to come up. We have to understand that we will sow what we reap. Whatever it is that's in our hearts is eventually going to come out in our lives. We can't change what comes out because we don't like what we've sown. There are things in this life that there are consequences in this life. And we're just talking about slowing down when the cop's there. Well, if you don't know that cop's going to be there and you go on by anyway a little too quick, the consequence is you're going to get a ticket. Mr. Betty, yeah, he'll slow you down. And so you're going to get a ticket if you speed past a cop and they see you. That's a consequence. That's going to happen. And the same fact of the matter is, if you go past that cop at speed limit, it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where he is. He's gonna ignore you. He's just going to let you go on by. That's the consequence. Consequences aren't always bad things. Consequences are just the outcome of an action. Specific actions determine specific outcomes. If we're dedicated to God, we will serve Him. We will do the things that are pleasing to Him, not only when others are around to see it, because that's one of the problems that the Pharisees had. They loved to sound their trumpets in the street and say, "Hey, I'm giving a lot of money right now. Look at me, I'm special." Well, we see that exact same thing going on today. There are wealthy individuals who will make a show of the fact that they've given millions of dollars to a specific cause. Well, I don't have millions of dollars, so if I'm giving a little bit, I'm giving all I have. But these people it's just like Jesus said with the widow's mite. She gave 2 mites, which make a farthing, and Jesus said she gave the most. It's like 2 cents. We'll call it 2 cents. She put 2 pennies in the offering, but according to Jesus, she gave more than all of them because she gave all that she had. What she had was 2 cents to her name. She put 2 cents in the offering. Now, if Bill Gates gives $10 million to a cause, that's pocket change. He's not hurting. That's like us dropping $1 in the offering plate. It's going to be about the same to him as it is to us. If I drop $1 in the offering plate, that doesn't hurt me any. Now, if I drop a 20 in there, I'm going to feel that because I don't have a lot of money to spare. But if I drop a 20 and Bill Gates drops $1 million, according to the Bible, I've given more. Because compared to what I have coming in, compared to what I have in the bank and in property and in non-liquid assets, that's a greater percentage, a much greater percentage of what I have. Once again, I'm not talking about giving. That's just a small aspect of the whole thought of being faithful and reaping what we sow. It's just a small portion of what God has for us. But we have to be faithful in all things. If we're faithful, God will give us the things that He's promised. There are so many times in the Word of God, I think this was mentioned yesterday at the convention. If we will, then God will. Once again, this is a conditional phrase. If we are faithful, then we can be assured that God is He's not going to make us rich. I'm not saying that everybody who's faithful to God is going to be rich, because Jesus said, in this life you shall have tribulation. In this life you shall have tribulation. Jesus assured us that we're going to have tribulation in this world. But if we're faithful to do what God has told us to do, He will be faithful to fulfill His promises that He's made to us. He will see us through. And I'll tell you this, I'd rather have joy in my heart than Bill Gates' bank account. Because that's not going to give me joy. That's going to give me fear. That's going to give me suspicion. That's going to give me all sorts of trouble. It's going to give me all sorts of trouble. But it's not going to give me peace, and it's not going to give me joy. I've had lots of good things in this life that the world has been able to give me. Things, car, house, wife, things in this world. But none of them compare to the joy of knowing that my heart is right with God. And if I don't wake up in the morning, it's all good. I have eternity assured to me in the presence of my Lord and Savior. And He tells us that His Spirit is the earnest of our inheritance. That joy that I felt when the Spirit is surrounding us, that's just a small percentage of the fullness of the joy that we have to expect when we're in His presence in eternity. And there's nothing in this world worth trading for that. Galatians, I already just read that. Sorry. Our appearance and speech will be altered as a result of the change that takes place within. The outside will be changed when we are changed inside. Once again, going right back to the evangelism theme of our district convention, from the inside out, when the inside is changed, the outside will change. We can camouflage ourselves on the outside if we like. But one of these days, someone is going to see through that. But God always sees through that. The change that begins in the inside is not a facade, but it will endure through all difficulties patiently and look to God for the power to overcome every obstacle. And God is faithful to help us through these trials that we're guaranteed to face. Once again, I look back on my life and I see all the times that I failed God, and everything that He promised was going to happen. When I reached out and touched that spiritual stove, it burnt my finger. When I got out and played in traffic, I got hit by a car, spiritually speaking. He told me these things. And when I look back on my life and I say, yeah, I understand. I understand the troubles I was going through. I understand the suffering that I was facing. I did it to myself. God told me if I did it, I'd be sorry. And I did. And I am. What can I do? Let's surrender to God. I'm going to surrender to God and see what happens. Just see what happens. Oh my goodness. He was right. When I do what He says, when I submit myself to Him, everything is better. There's joy that can overcome the worst of tragedies. There's peace in the midst of the storm. I don't worry about what's facing me because I know it's not me who's got control of the situation, because I can't. I can't fix it. But I know the one who can, and as long as I'm submitted to Him, He does. Amen. Faithfully, every single time. Back to lesson here for just a second. Significantly, some Israelites married Philistines, and Isaiah 2:6 indicates some of the Jews took on the practice of sorcery or witchcraft from them as well. As Isaiah 2:6, I do want to go ahead and read that here real quick. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east. And they are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. God had given them instruction to avoid intermarrying with these people, because by intermarrying with them, it would cause them trouble. He promised them, if you do this, you're going to have trouble. And guess what? They did this and they had trouble. They should have recognized immediately, oh wow, God said if I do this, I'd have trouble. And you know what? I did this and I have trouble. Once again, like the parent telling the child not to touch the stove. I ought to stop doing that. But what child is going to touch the stove and then go back after parents have warned them and do it again and again and again? And the parent is doing their best to keep that child safe, and the child just making that parent's job really difficult. And so it is with us. When we hear the Lord, when we feel the Spirit of the Lord leading us in a direction and continue to refuse to go in that direction. Part 2, long-standing feud. 1 Samuel 14:52. And there was sore war against the Philistines all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any strong man or any valiant man, he took him unto him. Now the Philistines were not mentioned among the 7 nations found in Joshua 3 and 10, but this rival was often a thorn in Israel's side. Even at the end of Joshua's life, part of the land of Canaan still had not been conquered by the Israelites, including portions inhabited by the Philistines. Excuse me. The Philistines lived riotously, drinking and partying. As will be studied more in depth in later lessons, Shamgar and Samson, bless you, were 2 of the judges of Israel who specifically battled the Philistines. In their use of Delilah, the Philistines demonstrated the extent to which they were willing to go in order to overcome the strong man and Israelite, the judge, Samson. Now, I just feel like it's important to point out here, just because I think it's interesting, just to make clear what it was that Delilah received in order to betray Samson. Each of the lords of the Philistines had promised to give Delilah 1,100 pieces of silver if she would give to them the secret of his strength. Now, 1,100 pieces of silver, their biblical commentators are assuming this is shekels, because shekel was a weight. It wasn't necessarily a coin at this point in history. So that's 5,500 shekels. Now, from what I can figure, that's right around $45,000 in today's money, according to current silver prices as of last night. $45,000 for the secret to Samson's strength. Well, it's made clear by the commentators that Delilah was not the nicest person in the world before she came across Samson. So this was just another opportunity for her to make some money. This was an opportunity for her to do her country a favor and herself a favor too. $45,000, yeah, she no problem. I can take care of this. And she did. Known to be technologically advanced for their time, the Philistines had considerable military advantage over Israel, who relied on them for sharpening many of their tools, even during Saul's time. Only he and Jonathan had swords, while the rest of the Israelites used unconventional weapons such as axes, ox goads, and even a simple sling and stone as were used by David to defeat Goliath. Now, an ox goad, it's a sharp, pointy stick. If anyone ever wondered what an ox goad was as you're reading the Bible, it's just a sharp stick. Basically, you got an ox who's not moving, you stick him in the backside with that stick and he'll get to moving because it's a sharp, pointy stick, and sharp, pointy sticks in your backside aren't comfortable, so you want to step away from that. So that's what an ox goad is. It should be noted that despite King Saul's weaponry, he met his end after a fierce battle with the Philistines. Part 3, the spirit of intimidation, 1 Samuel 17, 1 through 11. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Socoh, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Socoh and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched in the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel on the mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And just once again, just a minor break here. That's just over 9.5 feet by my calculations. Pretty tall guy. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. Now, once again, this is one of those terms that doesn't mean a whole lot to us. 5,000 shekels of brass. What's 5,000 shekels of brass? Well, once again, according to my understanding and my calculation, that's about 156 pounds. Now, that's about 10 pounds more than this. So that's his coat of armor. That's just his coat of armor to protect his chest. and his shoulders. This much weight, a little bit more. That's pretty big. That's a pretty good size amount of weight. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. Once again, 600 shekels, what's that? 19 pounds. The head of his spear weighed 19 pounds. Now, that's just the head of it. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how far I could throw 17 pounds. I mean, I could pick up 17 pounds, no problem, but to throw it and do some damage to somebody, you'd have to be mighty close and really slow. That's a lot of weight. And that's what he used as a spear. And he stood and cried out unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. The Philistines used bullying to attempt to keep the Israelites cowering in fear. By setting forth Goliath as their champion against Israel, the Philistines' war plan seems to have been primarily that of intimidation. Remember that the Philistines had already manipulated the Israelites' dependence on them for their blacksmithing needs, thus limiting Israel's ability to protect themselves. Israel and King Saul, despite his own impressive height and weapons, was terrified, discouraged, and immobilized by fear, all the result of the spirit of intimidation. Now, it did mention Saul's height here. I think it's important to point out here that at Saul's coronation, when he was first set forth as king, he was said to be head and shoulders taller than anybody else. Now, I couldn't find the average height of an Israelite in this time, but if the average height was 5'2", as short as 5'2", that would make Saul well over 6 feet tall. I am head and shoulders taller than my wife. I'm about 13 inches taller than her. So, I'm sorry?
How tall is that?
We don't know. That's.
You don't know how high you are.
I know how tall I am. I'm 6'2", but that.
Thank you. I can't figure it out, so
she's 5'1",
you're 6'2".
and I'm 6'2", so yes.
One thing that's really interesting about height
Mm-hmm.
is, while that, of course, Goliath was very tall, and he'll stay here in those figures. Over time, people have gotten taller.
Mm-hmm.
There is a plantation I went to in Georgia, and it was built in the Civil War time. And I noticed that when I was trying to go up the steps in that plantation, I couldn't just hold on to the railing. I had to do this.
Yeah.
And just kind of hunch down a little bit to get the railing. And they said over time people got taller, so it's quite a bit taller to them at this time.
Right.
Than even though 9 feet is really tall to us now, it's
Right.
really, really tall to them
Right.
back then.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like the average height would be closer to like 4.
Well, what they were saying, what I found, what I did find, I couldn't find any conclusive evidence, but they were saying around 5 feet. Around 5 feet would have been average height at that point. And of course, 5 feet as an average height doesn't account for outliers, because there are always going to be. I mean, if you have 99 people who are 4 feet 2 and one person who's 7 feet tall, the average is still going to be like 5'3" or something. So, yes.
Brother Hargraves had preached on this at one time, and I believe that the tribe of the Goliath and his brothers, he had 5 brothers.
Right, right.
If I'm not mistaken, I think during that time that we had giants in the land, and And I think that he and his brothers were of that last descendants
Right.
of those giants that
Right.
were in the land, because they were enormously
Right.
huge. And I believe because of their wickedness and because of their disrespect for the God of Israel, God allowed those giants to be slain,
Right.
to be eliminated.
Absolutely.
So I believe after what Brother Hargraves was preaching, that during that time, not only was Goliath destroyed, but also his brothers.
Right.
And they were annihilated, and there were no more giants in the land.
Right.
Archaeologists will prove even today that they're digging up bones now of huge, all over the world, huge bones and skeletons of these giants, and proof that they're really in the land.
Right.
And the whole purpose of that was to show God's mighty power, to see what he was made out of.
Right.
He said, you come against me with all this armor, and you try to intimidate me. He said, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts.
Right.
And was defeated by one little rock and a stone.
Yeah.
And all to show the mighty power of God.
Yeah.
I think that is just really awesome.
Well, it's intended to encourage us, and when we look at our own lives, we can see similar situations that we've had to face. I know specifically you and the loss of your husband. That was a giant in your life that you had to face, but you survived. You came away with overpowered. You overpowered that giant that the enemy placed in your life to destroy you. And that's the benefit of this, is to see that those things that don't destroy us, when we trust in God, they make us stronger. They make us more able to face those things that we deal with in the past, because we say, God, I see that you took me through this thing in my past that I knew I couldn't overcome. And because of that, I know that whatever I face in the future, you can help me to overcome. The spirit of intimidation so affected the mindset of the Jewish military that they became ineffective in battle. If their king and military leader, if their king and military leader, who should have been first to act to defend his nation against the enemy, was fearful and unwilling to meet Goliath's challenge, which of his inferior soldiers would feel up to the task? Now the king, he should have been the one to stand up and say, hey, you're challenging me and my army. That's my responsibility. I'll take care of you personally. That should have been the responsibility of the king. And once again, the king was head and shoulders taller than anybody else. And if the king was scared and sitting in his little throne room tent, what makes him think any of his little short soldiers going to want to run out there and fight this giant? If the king is scared. Any group will only rise to the level of their leadership. If a leadership can't attain to their own ambitions, you can be sure that those who follow them will be easy pickings for the enemy. Interestingly, the Hebrew root word for Philistine means to roll in dust or wallow self. Imagine the impression Goliath must have made in his armor and equipment during the 40 days of taunting. This was enough for the armies of Israel to wallow in fear and doubt that God could ever deliver them from what appeared to be so great an enemy. Rather than rising up in unity against these Philistines, Israel's military was rendered helpless for 40 days until a young man after God's own heart appeared. Now, David, he didn't have a first-hand familiarity with Saul's weak leadership and fears. Therefore, he was not affected or subject to them as these soldiers were. Up to this point, he had only looked to God as his leader and protector. His God had never failed him. Saul had failed the people on multiple occasions. But to David, his God had never failed him. As a result, David's victory was assured long before he went to Saul to ask permission to defeat this enemy of God. Overcoming the spirit of intimidation, part 4. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array army against army. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. Kind of drops out some spot, but David said, Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. He said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thy heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said to Saul, Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field. Then said David to the Philistine, Thou comest to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield. But I come unto thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth. And all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines. I do find it necessary to point out that David was probably not a 7-year-old here. At the earliest, he was probably in his late teens. Fact of the matter is, if you read the book, I think Leviticus and Deuteronomy, somewhere in there, it talks about the law and how old soldiers must be to go into battle. It's 20 years old. So David was not yet 20, or he would have been in the army. So that's as far as we know as according to, depending on how old he was, we don't know, but he was less than 20, at which time he would have been a part of the military. This account is steeped in intimidation. The stature, attire, weaponry, and words of the enemy all serve to strike fear in the hearts of the Israelites. The taunting words of Goliath ridiculed and manipulated, seeking to control the response of Israel and elicit their defeat before the battle even began. Not only did the Philistine use intimidation, it was also at work in the camp of Israel. Eliab, David's oldest brother, ridiculed him, and Saul initially discouraged him. None of Goliath's bullying or ridiculing, or the ridicule or discouragement from some in Israel, moved David from his confidence in God. Now, if we will recognize that the Lord is our shepherd, just as David did, there will never be anything that can stand in the way of us fulfilling God's perfect will in our lives. 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. If we are truly dwelling in the perfect love of God, there is nothing in this world or the enemy of our souls will be able to throw at us that will slow us down in our pursuit of all that God would have us to do. This has become an important prayer of mine, and one that we would all do well to adopt until His perfect love is found casting out fear in all of us. Lord, fill me with your perfect love, so that no fear will hinder me from the work that you have set aside for me. Confidence in God will take us deep into the enemy territory to rescue and restore souls who have been taken into captivity. We cannot fear the enemy that surrounds us today. We cannot be afraid and be faithful. God has given us the power to overcome every giant in our own past. He's given us the ability to survive to this day. He's given us these things for a purpose. He's allowed the trials in our life for a reason. Just as I got to speak during the state paper boost yesterday, He allows the difficulties in our past to strengthen us for the future. He helps us to overcome so that we can understand His willingness to work on our behalf. I know that God is able to take me through trials because I've faced trials. Why did I have to face those trials? Sometimes it was for my own understanding. It was for me to learn from the situation personally. Sometimes it was for a benefit for somebody else. There are some things, and I think I've spoken about this in the past. I know I spoke about it yesterday. There are some things that God has allowed me to experience in the past and helped me to overcome, because right now, today, there are people who are experiencing the same thing and see no hope of overcoming. They see no hope of victory versus the enemy that they're having to face through the trial that they're having to go through. But because God has already helped me through the exact same trial, my testimony is an encouragement to them to know that there's hope. Because God has taken me through these things, I have the ability to speak to somebody else and say, I know what you're going through. Let me explain to you what I did, how I experienced the same thing and overcame. When I look back at that and I see there was no way in my mind that I could overcome this situation. But when I turned to God, when I recognized that He had the power to overcome, I was able to overcome. Not by my own strength, but simply by submitting to Him. And that testimony of what God has done for me is powerful in the lives of others to lift them up and strengthen them and help them to overcome the trial that they're currently facing. Because I've already overcome it. Not by my own strength. Because when I tried on my own, I couldn't do it. When I did everything I could, when I realized that I had exhausted all of my efforts and I still couldn't overcome, I submitted to God. I said, Lord, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't face this giant alone. But with you by my side, I know that I can overcome everything. And I have. Everything that's come against me, I've been able to overcome, not by my own power, not by my own strength, not by my own ability, but by my willingness to surrender my will to God and say, Lord, you know, I can't do this. He recognized the tools that had worked for him in the past and used them. While the men of Israel ran from the enemy, David ran toward him. The youth's words and actions encouraged and built up the faith of the men of Israel. David's confidence in the Lord restored the faith of the Israelites and motivated them to quit cowering in intimidation and pursue the enemy. 1 Samuel chapter 17 should serve as encouragement for us today. God has not changed. We are not to bow and cower to the spirit of intimidation. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:17. As we read earlier, fear hath torment. Fear is not of God. Fear and doubt are closely related. They are both weapons that the enemy will use to hinder us from performing God's will in our lives. Fear, like doubt, is the opposite of faith. It's as much as saying to God, I know that you can't help me in this situation, so I'm not even going to look to you. If we will submit ourselves to the love of God, we will not be subject to the fear of the enemy. In the conclusion here, intimidation comes in many forms, blatant and subtle. It can attempt to move someone with threats and fear. Intimidators use fear to paralyze people and provoke specific responses. Intimidators do not want to leave things to God. They want to bring them to pass on their own. Not trusting God, they seek control for themselves. The spirit of intimidation remains a primary tool of the enemy. Sometimes those who intimidate may do so without even readily recognizing it. Intimidators feel an inordinate need to have their own way. They will use manipulation, discouragement, and threats or fear in order to gain control. This spirit is of the enemy of our souls and has no place within the lives of Christians or church members. Praise the Lord for God's willingness to help us to overcome. We need to trust Him. We need to recognize that we can't do it. We can't do anything. The song says, I can't even walk without Him holding my hand. I can't stand here. I can't study this lesson. I can't sit in a congregation and listen to a message. I can't walk out the door. I can't go to work. I can't do anything and expect it to work out without first putting my trust in God. And I've experienced firsthand that when I put my trust in God, I'm able to overcome. When I look to Him for the strength that I need, it's available. When I lean on my own strength, it doesn't work out so well. When I look to the help of others, it's not much better. But when I look to God, every time, every single time, I'm able to overcome. I'm able to succeed where I failed in the past. Even doing the exact same things, I'm able to succeed simply by looking to God for the strength I need to overcome. And that's what we need to do in our lives. We need to recognize who has the power. We need to recognize that we can't, but God can. And He wants to. He wants to be our help. He wants to be our strength. He expects us to trust in Him. That's why He warns us of these things, so that we can avoid them. I praise the Lord for His willingness to allow me to be here this morning. Thank you for your attention. Anyone have any thoughts? I have about 35 seconds. Yes?
Brother, the Bible says we learn obedience by the things that
We suffer. Amen.
And if we don't learn obedience, we're going to continue to repeat the same mistakes.
We're going to continue to suffer.
Even Jesus, the captain of our salvation, had to learn obedience
Mhm.
and bring His flesh. Chastisement is never enjoyable,
Right.
but God only chastises those that He loves.
Right.
So when we're chastised of the Lord, it's unpleasant, but it works for us a far greater reward if we'll submit to it.
Mhm.
If we submit, then we're His children.
Right.
But what does the Bible say if we don't submit? I don't like to use that word.
Yep.
But that's what He says.
That's
we're
right.
illegitimate.
Right.
So thank God that we can learn obedience by the
Amen.
things we suffer.
He gives us the opportunity. We just need to make the most of it.